Ready?
Could you go ahead and say and spell your first and last name for us, please?
Mary Kay Woodward, MaryKayWoodworth. You ready? Good afternoon, thanks for joining us. We wanted to talk to you all today because we're announcing that LaVista Hills Alliance has retained legal counsel to investigate whether there have been disenfranchised voters, voter abuse, and other issues with the LaVista Hills cityhood effort.
And what we'll be doing over the next several days, starting really right away, is gathering facts that we can, first of all, determine for ourselves whether these are things in which the Secretary of State may be interested in his continuing investigation, which, as you know, is part of a criminal investigation, potential criminal investigation, along with the GBI.
Now, we have encouraged voters and residents of the area who have experienced firsthand or have heard from their friends and neighbors that they have seen issues to contact us with specific information of what the issues are, their name, their address, and either send it to our website, to our voicemail box, which the number is on the press release, or to our Facebook page. We are very concerned about these allegations. No matter what the outcome of this investigation would be, the fact that our sacred right to vote could have been violated is disgusting and deplorable. As citizens, that is one of our most basic fundamental rights, and the idea that any workers or officials of DeKalb County government in any way have tampered with this right is very disturbing to all of us.
And we want to be clear, right now we know as much as anybody else about what has gone on. We've watched the reports on the news stations, we've read them in the paper, and so what we're trying to do is be of assistance to the Secretary of State in his investigation as we go forward. And so we have gathered and continue to gather story after story of all kinds of things that tend to point towards disenfranchisement of voters, and whether that is people who live within the proposed boundary of the city of LaVista Hills who were not allowed to vote, or citizens who don't live in the boundaries who were allowed to vote, people who were not allowed to cast provisional ballots when their voting status was in question. The most egregious that I heard was one polling precinct was actually locked up at Pleasantdale Elementary, and unless you knew to press the buzzer to gain admittance, then you had no way to get in to even access your vote, much less have any difficulties once you reach the polling floor. So these are the kinds of issues that we will be working on. We encourage people, if you know of anything, to come forward, let us know so that we can share these things with the Secretary of State. And if you're not sure, pass it on, because the Secretary of State knows what, and the GBI knows what they're looking for, and that's what we're out here to do. The question is not, should this referendum have passed, should it not have passed? The question is, what was the actual vote? People are entitled to a free and fair election, and we want to ensure that that has actually happened here in DeKalb County. And with all the issues that you read about all the time, certainly there is doubt in our mind. And so retaining legal counsel is the best way, we believe, to navigate the difficult waters of establishing the legal standard, which is, was there activity in essence that either would have changed the outcome of the election or calls into question the outcome of the election, and that's what we're here to find out.
And we have a very short time period to do this. We have not received specific information from the Secretary of State's office or the GBI, how long this will take, but so we're asking once again to communicate that to us. We've also talked to some of our elected officials and encouraged them, and they've encouraged us as well, to reach out to all their constituents to gain the same information. This is just as important as any other right we have as a citizen, and we certainly hope that we can get to the bottom of this and move on.
And the final thing that we wanted to hit before we are happy to take any questions you might have is that one of the reasons this is so important is the issue itself became muddled. Many voters didn't have the right to cast a fair ballot because our opposition was so much more interested in instilling fear and doubt that truth became a second-class citizens. And so we certainly, for those who have had a chance to vote, we want to make sure that their vote counts. It was a tough election, and regardless of what the results are, we want to thank those who stood up and voted for change and as a bulwark against the corruption that is permeating and apparently running amok in DeKalb County. And we'll take any questions.
Any questions?
One of the things that we've run into, and it sounds like y'all have to some extent too, is that there's a lot of anecdotal evidence out there, and there's a lot of stories that are told about stuff that they've heard when they went to the polls and that sort of thing. It sounds like what you're trying to do is just basically solidify stuff that you can actually take to and say, this voter had this bad experience, which is kind of what you don't have enough of.
Well, that's correct, and I wouldn't say not have enough of it. The gathering of information has just begun, but we have been receiving lots of information. But you're right, making it very clear that we need very specific, not third-party hearsay. That is important. But send us whatever you want. We'll put it in a document and move it forward.
And to be clear, to use your words, having a bad experience at the poll is different from something that rises to the level of irregularity or misfeasance or malfeasance that would cause an election to be overturned. Every time there are some complaints. But if we're talking about people who weren't allowed to vote because they couldn't access the building or they were told that they weren't registered when they were, those are the kinds of stories. And of course, we've all heard about the mystery memory card out of Briar Lake Precinct. Who knows how many votes? This was a razor thin majority, 136 votes out of the 15,000 that were cast. So that's why if everybody says that every election, that every single vote counts. It truly did in this one, and that's why we have to make sure that they were counted fairly and that the voters were treated fairly.
Talk to me a little bit about, in your opinion, why things went so well in Tucker and didn't go well in this election for you guys.
Okay.
Well, Tucker, most people thought that it was a city. They had that the benefit of 120 years of history, and good for them. They have a very tight, cohesive community there. I think that when you start with that in your effort towards cityhood, and you have a defined area with that name already attributed to it, it certainly does give you some advantage.
It also probably didn't hurt that the opposition decided early on that they were going to concentrate all of their efforts on the city of LaVista Hills, and there was the closing parts of our race. Tens of thousands of dollars were poured in under the table to avoid reporting requirements and spent in the final few days of the campaign, including a corporation that was set up on October 29th, just days before the vote, and was sending out mail and robocalls almost immediately thereafter. From what we've been able to tell so far, that entity was never registered as a ballot committee, as it would have to do with DeKalb County to be a legal entity, and was never registered with the Ethics Commission. So we're still looking into that, and that may become part of the Secretary of State's investigation as well, to find out where this trail of money came from. Was it legally spent? Was it legally raised? Because again, we need to know, was this a free and fair election? And quite frankly, how close was the relationship between not only those in the private sector that opposed cityhood, but those in the government who may have opposed cityhood? Was there any connection there? These are all things that need to be looked at. The important point is to get it right. It's not to have a particular outcome, but it's to have the right legal and just outcome, and that's what we're after.
That's correct.
How interconnected is the Secretary of State's investigation and your potential legal action? Do you have to have an advancement on the Secretary of State's investigation before you all decide to?
Kevin's been handling that, but I'm not aware of anything other than what the rest of us know that the Secretary of State's investigating.
Right. I mean, what the difference between the Secretary of State and a group or an agreed voter that wants to raise a legal challenge is we have 5 days from the certification, which was done on Friday by DeKalb, but to no one surprise, notwithstanding the fact that their voting machines were seized, that there's an ongoing investigation with the GBI, that they wanted to try and put this behind them as quickly as they could. So they certified on Friday, leaving us 5 business days in which to raise the legal challenge if that becomes necessary. And that's the point of having a lawyer on team, someone who has dealt with election laws before, who's familiar with the legal standards and can evaluate the evidence in case we need to make a decision before the Secretary of State. Secretary of State rightly indicated that he was not going to be rushing through this, that he's going to take the time to get it done the right way. And if that takes 3 or 4 months, then that's how long it will take, and we certainly stand behind him. The integrity of the process is what's at issue here.
So you're saying that if the state is planning to certify the election itself next week, probably, or at least consider certifying it. So you're saying legal action, that yesterday's certification triggers a 5-day,
That's
and
our
not,
understanding.
and not the Secretary of State's, or not the state's?
Well,
certification?
there are certain recount provisions and other things that are triggered, one by the county and the other once the state has finally certified the results. So we'll have, and again, that's why we have attorneys to look at the deadlines. It's a very complicated area of the law. In fact, it depends if you want to recount versus a recanvass. Is there a difference between that? There are terms of art as electronic ballots versus paper ballots. Who has the standing to do that? There is I think it's a ballot initiative advisory committee. I don't know the actual name, comprised of the Speaker of the House, Lieutenant Governor, and Governor, who can ask for a recount on their own, as opposed to a petition of an individual. So again, this is not my bailiwick. That's why we hired experts in there to read the law, who are familiar with the law, evaluate the evidence, and make a determination. Of course, share that with the investigators so that they can make a call on what the appropriate thing is. If a recount is necessary, or a revote is necessary, or if certification, because they find at the end of the day this was a perfectly fine election with just some minor blips, that's fine too. What we're after is the truth.
But beyond just the time window that an individual has to challenge it legally, if 3 or 4 months down the road the GBI finds out that there was tampering with, I mean, that still would invalidate the vote. Is that right?
Potentially.
You know? Okay.
Potentially it could.
Because I was just wondering, there's no statute of limitations on that, is there? For the investigation, they could go for a year and still end up.
Yeah, that's our understanding, and once again, that is why we have retained folks who are, intimately familiar with that, to help us along that path.
Have you been in contact with the leadership of the Board of Registration, Elections and Registration already, or is that something that the attorneys would do at this kind of point?
We have not personally been in touch with them.
Other than anecdotally, we've had a few voter issues that were brought to our attention, but those were anecdotal issues with things like absentee ballots that weren't received. But on this particular, on the broader issue that I assume you're addressing is whether there was potential fraud. We again have watched the same news reports that everybody else has, and the Elections Division has said, really without the benefit of the further investigation, immediately said they could guarantee there was absolutely no fraud. I will tell you, as a former prosecutor, that immediately raised some questions with me. The appropriate response to me would be, we believe in the integrity of our process, but we are going to wait to see, and we want to get to the bottom of this. But for somebody to predetermine and guarantee that there was no violations when they could not possibly know the world of evidence at this point, I thought was inappropriate.
Yeah, and just to go back to you, I thought you meant after this all came out. We have had in contact with, for example, Leonard Piazza several times over the last few months, who has been, I think he was the second in charge with the voter registration, who has been tremendously helpful, answering questions about compliance with different filings and things like that. Very, very responsive employee. He would answer emails at 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday night. The last communication that we had with him was on Wednesday, probably early Wednesday, asking some questions about absentee ballots. And he later in the day sent an email to one of our volunteers who was heading that up to say he could not answer questions any longer because he had been dismissed and put on administrative leave, requesting the integrity of the LaVista Hills vote.
Favor, can you say and spell your name?
Sure, it's Kevin Levitas, Levitas.
Your official title,
And I am a supporter of LaVista Hills. I'm not on the board. Mary Kay is the president of the LaVista Hills Alliance, and I'm just a supporter of the cityhood movement and specifically the Alliance.
All right, thank you.
And just one clarification, so if you have a 5-day window in which to file a challenge based on the certification Friday, is it fair to say that regardless of what happens, that you'll probably file a challenge between now and next Friday.
I think it depends on what information we receive.
Yeah, I mean,
Agree.
yeah, I mean, it is, obviously, the election was just held, and the reports of ballot boxes and ballot machines being seized just came out this week. So it's on a very, very tight time frame. But obviously, if we're going to pursue a legal challenge, it would have to be made within, at least initially, that 5-day window. And if, you know, that's a determination that we'll make, not only in consultation with the lawyers, but within the group itself, because there are hundreds of volunteers who spend countless hours knocking on doors, making phone calls, and this is as much to recognize their efforts and in support of their passion for this issue, to not just turn a blind eye when there's an allegation of potential, at least, corruption.
Right, thank you.
All right,
Thank
guys,
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Well,